Hello, my Bill 5000 Nation. How is everyone doing today? Hopefully everyone's having a great day. If not, hopefully it gets better from here. We are about ready to do some more of the 2020 Mrballen Scare-A-Thon. This is going to be parts 4, 5, and 6. Alright, so I'm excited. Let's get into it. So go ahead, turn them lights down low, put on something comfy, cut up with someone special. Let's get spooky. Alright, this one was titled Top 3 Scariest Audio Recordings, Halloween Scare-A-Thon Part 4. Alright, let's do it. You ready? I'm ready.
Today's top story could have very easily been a standalone episode. It's one of the more uniquely terrifying things I've ever come across. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to your birthday party, but then give them the wrong address. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2015, 32-year-old Henry McCabe was living just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, with his wife, Corrine, and their 2 daughters. Henry was a Liberian immigrant who worked as an auditor for the Minnesota Department of Revenue. On September 6th, Henry's wife and his 2 kids head out to California to visit with some family, leaving Henry alone. Henry decides, you know what, I don't get a chance to go out very much because I'm working all the time, I got family, and so tonight I'm going to cut loose. So he calls his 2 very close friends, and they decide to go to a nightclub. They get to the nightclub, and Henry very quickly starts drinking a lot of alcohol, and lots of people that were at the club would say he seemed pretty intoxicated. The trio would stay at the nightclub till about 2 in the morning, and then when they left, Henry, who had driven there and met his 2 friends at the club, was about to drive himself home when one of his 2 friends said, wait a minute, you can't be driving. We'll give you a ride home. So Henry gets in the car with them, and they start driving.
Friends don't let friends drive drunk. Period. And I know some people out there, I drive better when I'm drunk. That's just because you don't remember the stupid shit you did. Oh, poor Henry. I get though. I'm a father of 3. When I'm not doing stuff all the time and hanging out with the kids and spend time with the wife, like if they go somewhere, you just want to just do whatever. But see, I drink at the house. For 1, it's cheaper. For 2, I'm not going to get angry if I go outside and pee on my own flowers. Same.
Into Henry's house, but when they're about halfway there, Henry tells them to go to a very specific gas station. He said he wanted to get food and a drink, but the gas station he was trying to go to was 2 miles in the opposite direction away from his house. And his friends are telling him, you know, we can bring you to a closer gas station.
No.
We can bring you somewhere that's more convenient. But Henry was really...
No. Well, okay. Everyone is like this. When you are that level of drunk, gas station food is the best in the world. That is a 5-star dining experience. It's like the greasier and the nastier and the more messed up, the better. I am the same. Like when we lived down in Ireton, there was a speedway right next to the house. No. I would have my old lady drive us all the way to a marathon so I could get their nachos and cheese. Just because it was better than the speedways. It's really not. Like, it's basically the same, comes in a bag, throw down a thing, and, you know, grody stuff. It was just infinitely better. I don't know why. So I get it.
Aggressive and very adamant that that was the gas station he wanted to go to. And in fact,
Yeah.
I don't even want you to wait for me. I want you to drop me off. I will get whatever I want, and then I'll walk home. And his friends put up a bit of a fight, but ultimately they relented, and they drove him to this gas station. They dropped him off. They watched him go inside, and they turned around and they left. At 2:28 in the morning, Henry's wife, Corrine, looked at her phone, and she saw she had a missed call and a voicemail from Henry.
Done got lost.
She opens it up and she listens to it, and she's horrified at what she hears. On the voicemail, Henry sounds incredibly distressed. He's yelling that he's been shot, and it sounds like he's in pain. And
okay, that's not the direction I thought this was going to go. I just figured I'm lost. I got drunk. And they dropped me off at the gas station. I told them to go. And then I remembered, I don't know where I'm at. Oh, God. Dude got shot? Oh, shit. No.
then in the background, you hear this really intense growling sound. It's pretty easy to distinguish. And then Henry starts screaming about whatever is growling at him. And then Henry yells out, "Stop it," before the phone cuts out. The full 2-minute voicemail has never been released by police. This is what was made publicly available. Right after Corrine listens to this voicemail, she tries calling Henry. And it goes...
I mean, honestly, it sounds like a grown drunk man crying. Don't ask how I know. I'm not answering that question. But I'm just going to go ahead and say, I know what it sounds like when a grown drunk man cries. And that sounds eerily familiar.
Straight to voicemail. So she tries calling Henry's brother. She can't get in touch with him, so she calls the police. So the police go out looking for Henry. They go to his house. He's not there. And then they track down the 2 friends he was with, who immediately tell them, "Hey, we dropped him off at this gas station. We know it's a little bit strange that he wanted to go here, but he was insistent, and so that's where we dropped him off." So the police look around the gas station. They talk to the attendant. They talk to some people that were there. And no one knows where Henry is. So at this point, the police pull Henry's phone records, and they can see he placed a call to his wife at about 2:23 in the morning, but they can't determine where he was when he placed this call. The assumption is he was at the gas station. Then, just a few minutes later, he places another call to his brother, and his brother would report to police that all Henry was doing on the call was just sobbing. And again, with that phone call, the police were not able to pin...
Told you. I was right. Grown drunk man crying. That's what that was.
Point where Henry was when he made the call. And following that call to his brother, he turned his phone off. Several hours later, his phone would turn back on, and it would ping about 4 miles away from this gas station, and then his phone would turn off again. And the police are thinking, you know what, it's a grown man. He went out drinking with his friends. He's bound to sober up and turn up at some point. Let's just wait this one out. But Henry didn't turn up. And days turned into weeks, turned into months, and no one's heard from Henry. No one has any idea where he is. On November 2nd, so 2 months after Henry goes missing, his body is found in a lake up near the area where his cell phone had last pinged. This area is a very difficult area to access. There's no public access to this lake, and the lake sits in a very heavily forested area. Even though Henry had told his wife on the voicemail that he had been shot, and it sounds like he's being attacked on the voicemail, there were no injuries to his body. And so even though the case was bizarre to...
What? Getting angry here. So he hadn't been shot? Why would he say? I said some stupid stuff while drunk. But it's very offending things, not like, oh, I've been shot. And, okay, as for the words, look, we all have that friend that gets drunk and wants to go on an adventure. I don't have that friend. Come to find out, I am that friend. It's bad. But I'm just saying. We all have that friend. If you don't have that friend, sorry, bro, but you're that friend.
Everybody involved, they ruled it an accidental drowning. Some say he took his own life because he had recently bounced a check for his rent and he had a bad performance review at work. Others say he was just intoxicated and stumbled into the lake and drowned. But neither of those explanations account for the very obvious growling and strange sounds that we heard on his voicemail. And so to this day, Henry McCabe's death remains a mystery. 911 dispatchers hear a lot of interesting stories coming from the other end of the phone. But one group of dispatchers out of Reno, Nevada may win the award for the creepiest 911 calls ever received. When the details of these calls they got were put online, the internet went crazy. Here is their story. There was this old couple that lived about 20 miles east of Reno, Nevada. In 2010, the husband dies, leaving the wife all alone in this house. Shortly after his passing, she began calling 911 2-3 times a week, requesting things like, can you please put some water on to boil? Hey, can you change the thermostat? It was clear she was showing signs of dementia, and the dispatchers were respectful of her and gently told her that this is 911, you can only call if it's an emergency, and at some point the woman would understand her mistake and she would say sorry and she would hang up. No first responders were ever sent out for these calls because it didn't seem like an emergency, it just seemed like a confused elderly person. But no matter how many times they told her, she kept calling back. And eventually her calls took a turn. Instead of calling 911 to ask for help with mundane tasks around the house, she would call 911 believing she was talking directly to her deceased husband, John. The dispatcher would pick up and the woman would say, John, where are you? John, John. By this time, the dispatchers had gotten so many calls from this woman, they would recognize her address coming through and they knew what to expect. They would answer the phone, they'd be respectful, and they would tell her like they always did, this is 911, you can't call here, you need to talk to your family. And again, they did not send a responding unit out to her because it just seemed like she was confused, not in any danger. But one day when she called, she sounded frantic and scared.
John, please come home. Help me. I need help. John, come home.
This time they...
Anyone else think it's awful creepy that she sounds like Mrballen? Oh, God.
would send first responders out to the woman's house. When the responding unit arrives at her house just minutes after she had placed the 911 call, they go to the door and they're knocking and they're yelling for her and she's not coming to the door and it's all quiet in the house. The door's unlocked, so they open it up and they announce themselves. They walk inside and immediately they can tell the heat is not on because it's very, very cold inside the house. They look around the first floor and they can't find her, and there's no sign of a struggle or any obvious problems that could have happened inside of the house. So they go upstairs and they start searching all the rooms and no one's there until they get to the last room, and it's the bedroom. They go inside and there's an older woman who's lying on the bed and she's clearly deceased, and has been for several hours because rigor mortis had already set in. The police are able to confirm that the woman...
Did they say several hours? But didn't she just make a phone call like a few minutes ago to the police? What? No, it's no.
who's lying on the bed is the same woman who owns the house and lives there. And at this point, they call back to dispatch and they tell them, hey, you know, the woman that you claim made this 911 call, well, it can't have been her. Because based on rigor mortis, she was dead at the time that 911 call was made. But the dispatchers are like, no way. We know what she sounds like. We speak to her multiple times a week. We have a whole protocol built when we see her address come across because we speak to her so often. That 911 call that you got that led you to that house where she was, that call was made by her. What they ultimately decide is the reason for this discrepancy is she didn't have rigor mortis. She was just stiff because it was really cold inside of her house, and that she had died in those couple of minutes between leaving the 911 call and when officers arrived. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're a little freaked out. A few days go by and another call is placed to 911 coming from that woman's home address. The dispatcher sees that and has to do a double take, like, that's not possible. But they're thinking, okay, this could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be anything. Picks up the phone, and she's shocked when it's the same woman who is frantically yelling for John to come here, save me, help me, I need help. And the dispatcher, who's well aware of the history and well aware that this woman's supposed to be dead, stays calm, goes through the procedure, tries to get more information from this woman, but the call ends abruptly and there's no more information to be had. And so, not knowing what else to do, she asks a responding unit to go check this house out. The responding unit goes over to the property, they knock on the door, no one's inside, the door is actually still open, they go in, the house is empty, there's no one there, there's no one that could have made that call. At this point, dispatch is like, okay, this has got to be a prank. But the next day, same thing happens. Here comes a call from the dead woman's house. They pick it up, and it's this distraught woman yelling for help. I need my husband. And the dispatcher is trying to get more information, but they can't. And then the line cuts out. Once again, they have to send responders to this location because this woman has called 911 and is saying that she needs help. And once again, the officers get to the house, and it's vacant. Just like when she was alive, these calls would persist multiple times a week. They continued even after her house was broken into and burned to the ground. There's not even a house anymore. And there are still calls coming through from that address to 911. Finally, the police get in touch with the phone company and they explain the situation. And the phone company looks at their records and they say, actually, her phone line was disconnected almost immediately after she was deceased. But they tell police there's a chance that it might not have been disconnected properly at the site. And that could be a reason why it's still working. So they send a lineman to go check out the actual property to confirm her lines were disconnected properly and that no wires were getting crossed. And he said all of it checked out. Everything has been detached this whole time. The phone company thought perhaps there was a digital recording of her that got trapped in their system and was randomly bouncing to their call center. But the dispatchers would say, it doesn't sound like a recording that's playing the same every single time. It's always the same message. She's yelling for her husband to come save her. But the way she sounds is always different. It's a unique phone call every single time. So because there wasn't a definitive explanation for why this was happening, they had to treat each call like it was serious. And so multiple times a week for a year, they received these ghost calls and had to send out responding officers to check on her, even though the house was gone and there was nothing there and there was never anyone there. It was just a vacant lot. And then finally, a year after this woman has died, the calls just abruptly stopped. And the police did not launch an investigation into what it was, because the reality is police need to prioritize things that are threats to people or places. And this really wasn't either of those things. It was just really bizarre. And so the official explanation for how a dead woman could be calling 911 from a non-existent phone line in a non-existent house for a year is, we don't know.
Bro. I couldn't handle that. I've been done. No. Okay, even if the phone lines were crossed somewhere, did they go and check the neighbors? Why would the neighbor be saying the same thing as the woman in the house?
The following stories all take place in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. On New Year's Eve 1980, 20-year-old Karen Potak was out at a bar with her friends celebrating, and at some point in the night, she slipped out, she didn't want to stay any later, and she began walking home. Now, she didn't have a jacket on, and it was very cold outside, and she's kind of stumbling through the streets, and a man sees her and pulls over and offers to give her a ride home. She's kind of intoxicated, and so she agrees to get in his car, and they drive off. A couple hours later, around 3 a.m., the police received this phone call.
Yes, please, this is an emergency. Please send a squad car to Pierce Butler Road, Malmberg Manufacturing Company Machine Shop. Please send an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry. She's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks by the engine room. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
I love Mr. Mrballen's voiceovers here, bruh. He really brings out the fear and panic. Oh God. Oh, I love it.
Using this information from the caller, the police arrive in the back of that building and they find Karen Potak. She had been repeatedly bludgeoned over the head with a tire iron and then left for dead. Miraculously, she would survive, but because of her head injury, she forgot almost everything about that night, including the description of the guy who picked her up and who probably attacked her and who probably was the one who called police. So the police tried to interview some people in the area around where she was found, but it was a really deserted area and no one knew anything, and there was no physical evidence left at the scene, so the case went cold. Then, 5 months later, the police received another phone call.
You finally, I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody.
Hello? Are you there?
At this point, the police were not connecting this call with the call that immediately preceded finding Karen Potak, meaning they did not think that was the same person. And since in this call there were no instructions on where to find this person, they didn't really have anything to go on, so they took note of it, but ultimately kind of disregarded it. But just a few hours later, a group of teenagers were walking through the forest when they found the dead body. The body belonged to 18-year-old Kimberly Compton, who had literally just moved to Minnesota. She graduated high school and decided she wanted to start fresh in Minnesota. She hopped in a bus. She goes to Minnesota. She gets off the bus. She goes into the first restaurant she sees, which is a diner. She sits down by herself. She's eating some food. And a man approaches her and says, "Hey, can I sit down with you?" And so she lets him sit down, and he asks, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And she says, "Oh, I just moved here." And this guy offers to drive her around town and show her the sights. And she's like, "Great." 15 minutes later, he would kill her with an ice pick. At this point, police are beginning to suspect.
He says it so nonchalantly, like, yeah. Maybe 15 minutes later, he kills her with an ice pick, like, it's just another day at the office. Oh, God.
This person who keeps calling them immediately before they're finding women that have been attacked might be the same person. And 2 days after Compton was killed, they get another call that confirms this.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I'm so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe I did it. It's like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
From this point forward, they referred to this caller as the weepy-voiced killer. And even though they had his voice recorded, they didn't have any physical evidence, because he didn't leave any at the scene with Compton either, so they didn't have much to go on. The police would go to the diner, and they would talk to the staff that was there, and they would give a general description of the weepy-voiced killer, but it wasn't enough to pinpoint a suspect. So once again, this case went cold too. 6 months later, the police received yet another call.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I think I'm going to kill myself. I think.
Where are you?
I'm just going to. If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I've killed more people. I'll never make it to heaven.
Calm down.
A day later, they find the body of 40-year-old Barbara Simons floating in the Mississippi River, tucked up against some brush. The night before, Barbara had been out at a bar, and she had offered a cigarette to a man she hadn't met before. They began flirting and kind of hit it off, and at one point they were going to leave together, and before they left, Barbara turns to one of the waitresses and kind of jokingly says, "Boy, I hope he's nice, because I'm leaving with him." And the waitress, for whatever reason, had a really bad feeling about it and made a point of getting a really good look at the man she was leaving with. And that man, of course, would turn out to be the Weepy Boys killer, and as soon as he and Barbara left the bar, he would stab her to death and throw her in the Mississippi River. After the police began investigating this, they came to the bar and they interviewed that waitress. And she said, "I got a really good look at this guy." And so the police show her 100 different mugshots of previously convicted felons in the area. And she immediately identifies 38-year-old Paul Stefani and says, "That's the guy." Paul had been convicted for aggravated assault, and he also had a history of mental illness. Paul is immediately put under surveillance, but within 24 hours, he manages to ditch his tail and goes straight into downtown Minneapolis, where he picks up 19-year-old street worker Denise Williams. Paul took her down a dark alleyway, and she kind of sensed something was wrong. And so she grabbed a glass bottle that was sitting on the floor of the car. And when he went to attack her, she managed to hit him in the head and cut his face really, really badly. And she managed to protect herself enough that she could get out of the car and run away and save her own life. And a neighbor saw her running out of the car and kind of saw the whole exchange, didn't like how it looked, so they called 911. When police showed up, Paul was long gone. That same night, police get another call from the weepy voice killer. This one's a little bit different. He's actually asking for help for himself.
Where?
1505 Westminster.
1505?
Yes.
Westminster, what's the problem?
I'm all cut up. I got beat up.
What's your apartment number?
208. I'm bleeding.
208, where are you bleeding from?
From my arm, my face, my head.
Now, by the time this call is being made, the audio recordings of his previous phone calls had been made public. They were aired on radio shows, on TV. People had heard his voice, and it's fairly distinctive. And the dispatcher recognized his voice and told police, there's a chance the weepy voice killer just called us. So an ambulance comes and picks up Paul Stefani and brings him to the hospital, and when he's sitting in his hospital bed, police walk in and they apprehend him. He pled not guilty, and prosecutors did not actually have that much evidence connecting him to each of these attacks. They had these audio recordings, but that was about it. And so ultimately, he got 58 years in prison, not a life sentence. But considering his age, it wound up functioning like a life sentence. 12 years into that sentence, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was told he only had a year to live. And so it was at this point that he confessed to all of the attacks, including one they didn't know about. He murdered 33-year-old Kathleen Greening in her own home. He just didn't make a phone call to police afterwards. Paul would die shortly after his confessions. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these 3 stories.
Wow. Okay. Shit. I don't. Yeah, maybe. That's. Alright. We're moving on. This one's titled Top 3 Scariest Unwanted Guests, Halloween Scare-A-Thon Part 5.
In today's top story, we're reminded why truth is often stranger than fiction. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer the like button a beer and then give them an O'Doul's. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In the spring of 2013, a young woman named Melissa finally moved out of her mother's house and got her own place across town. For the first few months she was living there, she never noticed anything strange. But about 3 months into living there, things started to get a little bit weird. It started with a whole bunch of hang-up calls where someone from different numbers would call, she'd answer, and she could hear them breathing, but they weren't saying anything. And then she started getting these huge bouquets of flowers delivered to her front step, but they were delivered from anonymous. Then, after that, she started noticing things in her kitchen and her living.
Secret admirer, maybe? You know, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It might just be a secret admirer. It's not. It's not. Trying to be positive though here, okay? Let's go into this one positively.
Living room were going missing. Things like plates, cups, drink coasters, salt shakers, forks and knives, little things, but since she lived alone and she was the only one moving these things, they really stood out. Melissa had this habit that every time she went to bed, she would unplug her TV. She had this irrational fear if she didn't do that, that it would spark a fire and her house would burn down in the middle of the night. So she was pretty obsessive compulsive about always making sure the TV was unplugged before she went upstairs to bed. And so one night, around the same time she's getting these hang-up calls and there's flowers being sent to her door and things are going missing, she unplugs her TV and she goes up to bed. The next morning, she gets up and comes downstairs, and the TV's plugged in again. She convinces herself that, well, she must have forgot to unplug the TV. As rare of an event as that is, it has to be what happened. And so that night, she unplugs the TV and remembers looking directly at the plug, confirming that, yes, I've unplugged the TV. And then she puts it down and looks again at the outlet. It's not plugged in. It's definitely not plugged in. And then she goes upstairs to bed. The next morning when she walks downstairs, she had the sense of dread that when she turned the corner, because her TV was right at the bottom of the stairs, that when she turned the corner, it would be plugged in again, and her worst nightmare would come true, that something is happening on my first floor when I'm asleep at night. And as she comes down the stairs and turns the corner, what does she see? The TV is plugged in again. She's horrified, but has no idea what to do. It's not some malicious act. And she's telling herself, well, maybe I forgot again. But then she's like, no, I remember last night staring at the plug. I definitely unplugged it. And so she flies around her first floor to make sure, one, everything is locked, but two, no one else is in here. And when she's satisfied that, yup, it's empty down here, and two, everything is locked, she sits there thinking, well, now what do I do? Do I call the police and say, someone's plugging in my TV? You know, she can't do anything. And it was at this point that Melissa developed a very real fear of her first floor.
I mean, how would that conversation go? Oh, police, yeah. Look, I get up every morning and my TV is plugged in. I do not know what to do about it. Oh, shit.
And she began going to bed so early at night because she could not be on that floor when it started to get dark. And so imagine living alone, being afraid of going down to your first floor, how scary it would be at night when you're laying in bed, your door's shut, and any noise you hear in the house, you're going to attribute to your first floor. And so Melissa was living this absolutely wretched life where she's scared of everything outside of her bedroom. And so with that as context, Melissa goes to bed one night super early, probably like 3 o'clock. The sun's not even down yet, but she's upstairs. But eventually it does get dark outside, and she still has not fallen asleep. And so she sits up in bed and she turns on the TV. And right away, the channels on the screen start to change. And she's thinking, oh, I must be laying on the remote. But then she remembers the remote's in my hand. And so she's looking at the remote, and then she's looking at the TV. She's not touching her remote. And the channels are still cycling. Now, Melissa had what's called a skybox, which means her downstairs TV was connected to her upstairs TV and vice versa. If one was changing the channel, in real time, the other changed the channel. And so as she's looking at her remote and not touching it, and looking at the screen as the channels are changing, it dawns on her that someone downstairs is changing the channels. And so frozen in fear, all she can think to do is turn off her TV, because that's the one function that does not have any impact on the other TV. So she turns the TV off. And so in total darkness, in a house she's already terrified of, she is straining her ears to try to hear some sign that this is either something, someone's down there flipping through channels, or this is nothing, and I just happened to turn the TV on when the skybox was malfunctioning. And as she's sitting there, all she can hear is her own breathing, and she can feel the pounding of her heart in her chest. But she doesn't hear any sounds in her house. She doesn't hear the TV on. She doesn't hear footsteps, doors opening, none of that. It's silence in the house. So after what probably felt like an eternity, she just grabbed a pillow and clutched it in front of her and put her head into the pillow and just laid like that until she eventually fell asleep. The next morning when she gets up, the sun is out, and it's this huge relief, because suddenly, with the sunlight pouring in the windows, it was like the house wasn't scary anymore. And she's telling herself, you know what, that had to have been just some anomaly with the skybox. I bet I go downstairs and the TV's unplugged. And so she goes downstairs and the TV is unplugged. And so that for her kind of confirms that, okay, the paranoia is getting to me. I'm losing my mind a little bit. I got to tell someone what's going on. And so as it happens, that day she was going to a family birthday party. And so when she gets there, she pulls her older brother aside and says, here's the strange things that are happening in my house with the skybox and all this. And at first, he looked at her like, really? This is what's going on? You're seeing ghosts in your house? But when she really focused on the specific things that were happening, like the plug going back into the wall 2 separate times, and then the skybox thing. So the TV is kind of wrapped up in the weirdness that's been happening in her house, and the missing items in her house. And so for the brother, it all kind of added up to, okay, this does seem a little bit weird. And he offered to live with her for a few days and just see it for himself. And as they're talking, their younger brother happens to walk by, overhears the conversation, and says, oh, I'll stay there too. For 4 days, the two brothers lived on the first floor of Melissa's house. And they don't see anything. They don't hear anything. It's completely ordinary. And Melissa at first was reassured, but then started to think, does that mean whoever's been doing this stuff is watching my house really closely and knows that I have, protection at my house right now and they're staying away? Does that mean I'm being watched really closely? And so finally, when her brothers are getting ready to leave after the 4th day, she was practically begging them to stay. She couldn't stand the idea of staying in this house. Her brothers reassured her that she had nothing to worry about, but if she experienced anything weird, anytime, any day, just call or text and they would be there in a heartbeat. Although she did not feel reassured, it was starting to get late, at least by her standards. It was like 3 o'clock. The sun's getting close to going down, so she needs to go upstairs.
It's 3 o'clock in the freaking afternoon. Oh, shit. That's bad. I know it's not funny, but that's hilarious. How was your night? Well, 3 o'clock, I went to bed. In the morning, no. It's like in the afternoon. Got the Denny special.
So she goes back in her house and does like 20 trips around her house to confirm everything is shut, everything is locked, no one's in the house, everything is safe, and then she goes upstairs to bed. But like most nights, she was so scared of everything outside of her bedroom door that she couldn't sleep, and as she's laying there in utter silence in her room, she hears the unmistakable sound of her back door opening, and she hears footsteps walking through her first floor, and then she hears the TV turn on, and her brothers have been watching her TV last, and they had the volume set really, really high. So as soon as the TV went on, it blared all through the house, and immediately the TV turned back off, because whoever turned it on knew that that was going to wake up whoever was in the house. Melissa doesn't know what to do. Before, whatever the heck was happening in her house was a little bit subtle. It was like she had to think about what she was hearing to confirm
Now
what was actually happening. Now, this person is just strolling into her house in the middle of the night and flipping on the TV and blaring it through the house. And so she immediately is like, oh my God, what do I do? And she picks up her phone and she calls her brother. And he picks up right away and she goes, someone is in the house right now. The brother's like, I will be there in 10 minutes. Do not leave your bedroom. Don't do anything. Stay on the phone with me. So Melissa's shaking out of fear, and she gets up as slowly as she can, and she walks over to the window to get as far away from the door, which was locked, as she possibly could. And she's glancing out the window, waiting to see her brother pull up, as she listens for any sign that this person downstairs has begun walking upstairs. Finally, Melissa sees out of the corner of her eye her brother's car pulls up across the street, and he, along with her younger brother, hop out. They run across the street towards her house. They hop over the fence, and they run down the alley between her house and her neighbors, and they go towards the back out of sight. She's still on the phone with him, and she's saying, do you see him? Do you see him? Do you see him? Do you see him? And he says, hold on. He goes to the back of the house where he knows you can look in and basically see the whole first floor. And as soon as he gets to that spot where she's expecting him to give her a report, and he pauses, there's silence on the phone, and she goes, what do you see? And he says, okay, yep, there is someone in your living room right now. I'm going to hang up and call the police, and I'm going to call you right back. Now, Melissa knew what she heard was very real to her, but to have it confirmed by her brother right now took this to a whole nother level of fear. Now she's legitimately fearing for her life. There is a person, an intruder, in my house right now, confirmed. They are right downstairs, and they've been coming into my house probably for weeks. And so her brother hangs up the phone and begins calling the police. Meanwhile, Melissa is just standing in this room, horrified, as she listens to a stranger walk around the first floor of her house. But because she was hearing the footsteps clearly downstairs, she decided she would just walk over to her door and look through the keyhole, which was oversized on her door. And if you looked through it and over to the left, you'd actually look downstairs to the first floor. You'd only see a sliver of the first floor. And so very carefully, she walks her way over to the door. And as she kneels down to look through the keyhole, her phone rings. It was in her pocket, and it wasn't on silent. It was on loud, and it was her brother calling back. And she kind of fumbles for her phone. She drops it on the ground. It's still ringing, and she finally silences it. And then reflexively, she pokes her head back and looks through the keyhole, and standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up at her is a man with a hat pulled over his eyes who's clearly heard the sound, and he begins walking up the stairs. She's falling over backwards, screaming at the top of her lungs to get her brothers inside. She hears them come charging inside. She hears this epic struggle on the stairs, and she hears this person who's in her house, because it was a voice she didn't recognize, screaming, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And then it's quiet. And so she opens that door because she wants to help if she can. And she looks and she sees her brothers have this man pinned on the stairs. He's not moving. And she sees her younger brother is holding something. And he holds it up to her and he just shakes his head. And it's a frickin' knife. And then she puts it together that the stranger in her house was carrying this knife. And before she can even take that information in, the older brother takes the hat off of this guy, and it's their mother's ex-boyfriend from 10 years ago.
What?
The same one they all believed had an inappropriate attraction to Melissa. Police show up and take him away, and he quickly admitted to sneaking into her house for months. They don't know how he got in, and he would never tell them. But he admitted that, yeah, I was breaking in almost every single night. But he never gave a good reason why. He just started doing it. Police cited mental illness as the likely culprit for why he was doing it. And the family believed this could be something more sinister. But either way, he was given 3 years in jail. And the family, once again, cut all ties with him.
What kind of messed up bullshit is that? Oh my god. Ooh, okay.
In February of 2013, a young woman named Kim finally moved out of her parents' house, and she moved into this tiny little apartment that she absolutely loved. Kim had severe social anxiety. She could not stand being out in public, talking to people she didn't know. And so she would do everything in her power to stay indoors. She had a job that didn't require her to travel. And so having this little apartment was like her little oasis. When she was there, she was safe. If she had to leave, she was practically running to her car and running back so she didn't have to talk to anybody. In those first few weeks she was living there, as much as she tried to avoid all contact with other people, there was one person she was kind of forced to have an interaction with, and that was her landlord. But her landlord turned out to be this awesome old woman named Olivia, who really took a liking to Kim and kind of looked at Kim as like her daughter. And Kim was surprised at herself for wanting to interact with Olivia. She was very comforting, and she was this really nice lady. And so even though they didn't actually interact that much, they developed this relationship where Olivia liked to make food, and she'd come over to Kim's door and she'd knock and she'd leave it outside of her door, and she didn't expect Kim to come out and talk to her. She knew Kim was uncomfortable being out in public, and so she didn't push her to do that. Instead, she just expected her to eat some nice food, and whenever Kim was done eating, to put her dishes back outside the door, and Olivia would take it up and she would go clean it, and that was that. And so Kim really grew to love Olivia and was very happy to have her there. It was like she made her feel safe. 2 months after moving into this tiny little new apartment, Kim started taking a new medication for her anxiety. Now, historically, she had taken a whole bunch of different medications and knew when you start a new one, it's not uncommon to have a whole bunch of side effects that you're just not used to, and they're kind of awful, and you need some time to get used to them. So at the same time she's taking this new medication, she starts to notice that she's forgetting things. Things in her apartment are being put in places she does not remember putting them. And things are going missing, and she can't remember where she put them. And so even though she was expecting side effects from this new drug, she was really frustrated with the memory.
Not this again.
Loss. She also noticed this medication made her exceptionally drowsy, to the point where most days she had to take a nap for 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day just to get through the day. Because Kim had such intense anxiety about being out in public, she did not want to go to the doctors to get a different prescription or to even talk to the doctor about, is this normal? Because that doctor's visit would necessitate a whole bunch of interactions with people she doesn't want to interact with. And so she decided, you know what? I'm just going to take my medication. I'm going to let myself adjust to this new normal, and everything will be just fine. During the time period that she's experiencing all these side effects that she is attributing to her new medication, she got a delivery from Olivia. It was a Greek salad that she knew Kim loved, and Kim's psyched about this Greek salad. She brings it in her apartment, and she decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have a nice day to myself. I'm going to go in my bedroom. I'm going to turn on Netflix, and I'm going to eat this salad in bed. It's going to be awesome. And so she's sitting in bed, she's eating her salad, she's watching Portlandia, and then she falls asleep right in the middle. Like as she's eating her salad, she's falling asleep. She's so tired. When she woke up, she's like, wow, I've never fallen asleep that hard and that fast before. And she's literally still got the fork in her hand from eating her salad. And then she notices on the other side of the bed, the left side of the bed, these sheets are all disturbed, like someone has been laying there. And Kim always sleeps on the right side of the bed. It was almost like a compulsion for Kim that she could never sleep on the left side, like it was bad luck. And she reaches her hand out and she feels that side of the bed where it's been disturbed and it's still warm. And so she quickly thinks to herself, well, I guess I must have rolled over and laid on that side of the bed and then rolled back to this side, just miraculously right back in the same position I was in with the salad fork still in hand. And that's when it kind of clicks in her head, like, that's not possible. That's not possible. So what does that mean? Does that mean someone's in my apartment right now? And so she leaps out of bed, she gets her phone, she enters 911, and she's ready to dial it, and she flips on all the lights in her apartment, she's running around, and there's no one in her apartment. The apartment's still locked, everything is normal. And so she puts her phone away, and her heart's still racing, she's very stressed out about what's just occurred. Because in her mind, in the back of her mind anyways, she knows she didn't roll over. That didn't happen. This is when Kim began to wonder, are all these strange happenings in my apartment connected to what just happened now? Because this incident right here does not feel medication side effect driven. And so all of a sudden she's looking at the other weird things in her apartment, like the missing toothbrush and the missing shoes and things getting moved around, as suddenly connected. And it dawns on her that maybe she's been blind to something else happening. Maybe someone is breaking into my apartment. So for the next couple of days, Kim watched her apartment like a hawk to see if there was any indication of somebody breaking into her apartment at any point. And there was nothing. She always locked the door. She always kept the windows shut. The only thing that stood out to her was when she woke up in the mornings, her bedroom had a very distinctive smell to it. It wasn't her smell, and it wasn't a smell she was used to. It was like another person's smell, and it really freaked her out. She decided, it's time to tell my parents. And so when she tells her parents and she's describing out loud what's been going on in her apartment, it's the first time she's hearing herself say this stuff out loud. And it sounds way more creepy and way more scary than it did in her own head. And so as she's telling them, she's becoming scared to go back to her apartment. And her dad picks up on that and says, hey, I'll go back with you. We'll look around your apartment and we'll make sure it's safe and secure. And then on the way out, we'll check in with your landlady and we'll let her know what's going on. So she's brought in and everything's going to be fine. They go back to her apartment, they go inside, and when they walk in, everything looks normal. They kind of do a walk through the apartment, looks normal. But before her dad leaves, he says, hey, let me just do a closer inspection of your whole apartment. Let me look everywhere and make sure there's not like some special way to get in here, just to give you peace of mind. And so he went into her bedroom and he starts looking around and he's lifting up the mattress and looking underneath. And then he opens up her closet, which is this big closet, lots of clothes in there. It's not quite a walk-in closet, but it's big enough that you can easily stand in there. And her
I don't like where this is going.
father reaches in and splits the clothes, and he uses his light to look at all of the back wall. And he pushes on it, and he taps on it, and he sees if there's any sort of special compartment. There's not. But before he walks out again, he notices a little blurb of writing on the bottom right corner of the inner wall, an area that you could only see if you were standing in the closet looking for strange things on the wall of the inside of this closet. He kneels down to take a look at it, and it's this little tiny blurb of text that says, come back here so I can look at you. And the only way you could write it is if you were laying down in this tiny little corner facing the exit of the closet. And that's when her father looks at the bottom of the closet, and one of the slats on the closet door was missing. And so in theory, if you were someone that was writing this message, you'd be laying down where your eyes would be looking through that slat right at her bed. Her father put it together and he stood up. He walked out to his daughter and he said, come over here. He showed her what's in her closet and he said, did you write that? And she goes, no. And he goes, all right, it's time to leave. They walk outside, they go to his truck, and he calls the police and he says, someone's breaking into my daughter's apartment. Police show up, and using CCTV footage, they capture a grown man regularly going into Kim's apartment in the middle of the night, and he clearly has a key. It would turn out to be Olivia's grown adult son named Henry, who lived with her, who apparently, as soon as he saw Kim for the first time, he fell madly in love with her and became very obsessed with her. And he developed this fake relationship in his mind where he believed he and Kim were dating, even though Kim didn't even know Henry existed. She didn't even know he was living with Olivia. She had never seen him before. During questioning, Henry said what he did is he got sleeping pills and he ground them up, and anytime his mother was delivering food to Kim, which she loved to do, and she was always excited about it, so she was talking about it so he would know it was happening, he would put sleeping pills in her food, he would mix it in, and then he knew as soon as it was delivered, she would be asleep, and he would use his mother's spare key to go into the apartment, and what he said he did is he never touched her. He never laid a hand on Kim. Instead, he laid next to her in bed or watched her from inside the closet. So for the 4 months that Kim lived...
What the hell is wrong with this dude? Holy crap. That's psycho. Some Norman Bates type crap right there, bruh.
In this apartment where she believed every time she came inside and shut the doors that she was kind of away from society, she could just be alone in her bubble. Well, in reality, there was some psychopath just a few feet away from her almost the entire time. When Olivia found out about all of this, she made a point to tell Kim she had nothing to do with it and she was terribly sorry, but their friendship ended.
Yeah.
On October 17th, 1941, 73-year-old Philip Peters was supposed to join his friends for dinner, but he never showed up. His neighbors knew Phil was living alone at the time because his wife had recently fallen and broken her hip and was in the hospital. And so they were worried about Phil being on his own, and they thought, you know what, let's just be sure, let's call the police and have them go over and check on him. When the police arrived at his house, they knocked on the door, no answer. They tried the door handle, it was locked. They tried the other door, that was locked too. They looked in the windows, it was all dark, and they had to get another neighbor who had a key to open the door for them. When they stepped inside, there was blood everywhere. On the walls, on the ceiling, everywhere. And in the middle of the kitchen is Phil Peters, face down. He has been bludgeoned to death. The police immediately draw their weapons, and they're looking around the house thinking someone could still be here. And they clear the whole house, and there's no one there. And so a whole bunch of detectives converge on the house, and they start investigating. And they realize pretty quickly how strange the scene was. Nothing in the house was vandalized. Nothing in the house was stolen. And Phil himself was just a very modest, retired auditor. He certainly didn't have any enemies, and so the revenge angle didn't necessarily make much sense. But then you got to remember that when police first got there, before they discovered his body, the house was shut and locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. And so whoever was in there with Phil at the time of his death must have known Phil enough to have a key of their own or have Phil open the door for them. So it made investigators wonder what would motivate some person that's in Phil's inner circle to commit such a heinous crime when the obvious angles, such as theft, vandalism, revenge, have basically been crossed off. Not to mention, there was virtually no evidence of who could have done this, with the exception of the murder weapon, which was this big piece of metal called a stove shaker. But the person who had used it to kill him had taken the time to meticulously wipe it off. So there was nothing on it, no fingerprints, no anything. So for months, detectives agonized over this case, but they got nowhere. 9 months later, a housekeeper was hired by Phil's widow to help around the house now that Phil was gone. And she said as soon as she moved in, she started hearing strange tapping sounds all through the house, but didn't think anything of it. And so that day, the day she's calling police, she's alone in the Peters residence, and she hears the tapping, and it's coming from the kitchen. And she thinks, oh, it's got to be a woodpecker just outside the house, outside the window. And she said as she looked into the kitchen, on the other side of the kitchen was a door that opened up to a flight of stairs that went to the second floor. And she said it was slowly opening. And out from behind comes this white hand that reaches for the side of the door and begins to pull it open. And she screams, and the hand retracts back into the space. And then she hears it storm up the stairs and run around on the upstairs before going silent again. She ran out of the house, and she ran to a neighbor's house to call the police. The police immediately go to the house, and they go inside, guns drawn, and they're looking for this person because they're thinking perhaps the murderer is back. And they're looking all through the house, and there's nothing. There's not even a sign of a break-in. And so the police go back to the housekeeper, Aunt Miss Peters. They explain that we couldn't find anyone, but given the history of your house, we don't think it's safe for you to be in there. And so the housekeeper didn't go back, and Miss Peters was moved back to the hospital where she could be looked after during the police investigation. At this point, the police decide we're going to permanently stake out this house. We're going to have 2 detectives that are outside this house watching it at all times. And so two detectives go, and they're sitting outside, and for a couple of days, they're not seeing anything, they're not hearing anything, and they decide to just go inside and have a look around. They both walk into the house, they go upstairs, they look around, they don't see anything, they go back downstairs, and as they're standing on the first floor getting ready to leave, they hear what sounds like a doorknob turning upstairs. They both heard it, so they go upstairs and they start searching different rooms, and one of the detectives goes into the bedroom and opens up a closet, and past all the clothes, bottom left-hand corner, he sees a foot dart into a little space in the back corner of the closet. And without any hesitation, this guy jumps head first into the closet and grabs the foot of this mystery person who's crawling into a tiny little panel in the back of a closet. And he holds on to this person who's fighting with their life to get away, and he starts pulling them out, and he's yelling for his partner to come over. He comes charging in. They both grab this person, and they yank this person out, and they would describe him as the strangest looking person they had ever seen. He was super tall, but rail thin, and his skin was so dirty, it appeared gray. His name was Theodore Conies, and he had been living in this house for a year. Before Conies moved in, he had fallen on hard times. He was sleeping in alleyways, and as it started to get colder in September of 1941, he decided he would approach his longtime friend, Phil Peters, and he would ask him for some money and maybe an opportunity to crash at his house for a couple of days. But as it happened, when he got to Phil's house, Phil wasn't there. Phil was at the hospital visiting his wife who had a broken hip. And so the house was vacant. And Conies saw an opportunity and he broke in. And at first, his plan was just to steal food,
That's crazy.
get warmed up a little bit, and then leave. But he noticed when he was looking through the house for things to take, that in the back of one of these closets was a panel that led to this tiny little almost secret attic space that wasn't being used for anything because it was impossibly small. You'd have to be incredibly skinny just to get through the little square opening that would bring you into this little space. And then once you got in, you could only get in by slithering head first in. You couldn't stand up. You had to be laying the entire time. You couldn't extend your legs all the way if you're a full-grown adult, so you're kind of tucked up in almost like a pseudo-fetal position. But Conies saw this as a huge upgrade from living on the streets, and he decided that this is where he's going to live for the winter. And so he went around the house gathering supplies between blankets and food and water, and he filled his tiny little space, and then he went back downstairs and he locked the front door again, made sure everything looked the way it was when he showed up, and he went into his little space and shut the door behind him. And when Phil came home that night, he didn't notice anything. And for the next several weeks, Phil never noticed a thing. Every time Phil would leave, Conies would sneak out, go downstairs, make himself some coffee, get a bite to eat, then go back up to his little space. He even cut into the house's wiring system and stole one of Phil's radios, brought it into the cubby with him, attached it to the new wiring, and he got to listen to the news so he didn't feel so isolated from the outside world. But about a month later, Conies leaves his little spot to go downstairs because he thinks Phil is gone. He gets to the kitchen, he's going to the fridge. When he shuts the fridge, he looks over, and there's Phil standing there looking at him like, what are you doing in the kitchen? In a panic, Conies grabs the stove shaker and beats Phil to death. Not knowing what else to do, he wipes off the murder weapon, leaves it where it is. He goes in the fridge, he gets some more food and drink, and he goes right back up to where he lives. He would follow the investigation of Phil Peters' death on his radio, curled up inside of Phil Peters' house. Conies was quickly found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. After hearing his sentence read to him, he says out loud, "Now I feel safe. I'll have a better home than I've had in years." So that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's
What? That's like 9 kinds of fuckered up right there. What? So beating him to death, I'm sure if he just would have talked to him, everything would have been fine. Well, what's wrong with people? Good God. All right. This one is titled Top 3 Scariest Places People Got Stuck. Halloween Scare-A-Thon Part 6.
Today's top story takes a sudden, wild detour that you will not see coming. Honestly, I'm shocked it's taken me until now to cover this one. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then...
So basically what he's saying is this is going to be some of that M. Night Shyamalan bullshit that he comes in with. That's just going to just make me silently cry on the inside.
You've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please point at the like button's shirt and tell them they have something on it. When they look down, flick them in the nose. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. While he was in college at Carnegie Mellon University, Aaron Ralston studied mechanical engineering, French, and piano, and then upon graduation, he moved to the Southwest and took a job as an engineer. But 5 years into his corporate job, he realized he hated it, and so he quit and moved to Colorado to pursue his real passion in life, which was mountain climbing. On April 25th, 2003, Ralston takes a trip to Utah where he plans to explore the Canyonlands National Park. He slept in his truck that night, and the next morning at about 9:15 a.m., he gets up, and it's this beautiful Saturday morning. He hops on his bike, and he bikes 15 miles to Blue John Canyon. The canyon was an 11-mile gorge that at certain places was as narrow as 3 feet across. And so Aaron locks up his bike and he begins walking through this canyon. About 6 hours later at 2:45 p.m., Aaron is right at this section of the gorge that's getting really, really narrow, and below him is about 100 feet down to the bottom of the desert floor. He was going to walk with both feet on either wall because it was so narrow and kind of Spider-Man his way through this section of the canyon. But as he began that maneuver, a huge 800-pound boulder became dislodged above him, and it comes tumbling down, and he barely gets out of the way, but it lands on his arm, and it pins his arm against the wall, and he can't move, and he's suspended 100 feet off the ground, and he's 20 miles away from the nearest paved road. Immediately, he tries to pull his hand free and push the rock off, but it's not going anywhere. And that's when it dawns on him that he didn't tell anybody he was going to be in this gorge today. No one knows he's here, and he's so far away from anyone that can help him, and he doesn't have a cell phone, he doesn't have a radio, he's got no way to communicate with anyone who could potentially help him. Now, the position he was in was not him dangling by his arm 100 feet off the ground. He was able to position himself against the rocks where he wasn't dangling. He was able to sit fairly comfortably besides his arm being crushed, and he was able to use the rock that actually had pinned him there as a sort of table or something to lean up against. And after he calms down a little bit, after a few minutes, he reaches back and he pulls his bag out in front and he starts taking inventory of what he has. And all he had was 12 ounces of water, so just a single water bottle, and he had 2 burritos and some candy bar crumbs. That's all he had. In terms of tools, all he had was this crummy multi-tool. And it did have a little knife that extended off the end, and almost immediately he takes that multi-tool and begins chopping away at this boulder to try to see if he can maybe crack it and push half of it off. But he's finding out very quickly that it's completely futile. It is not moving. It is an enormous boulder. It's not going anywhere. He cannot possibly break it with this crappy little multi-tool. As the sun began to set, Aaron started thinking really seriously about trying to cut his arm off. But again, all he has is this multi-tool and this crappy little dull knife, and he's thinking there's no way I can cut through my arm. There's bone in there. I can't possibly saw through the bone. And so very disheartened, he puts his multi-tool away and he begins to nurse the water and slowly eat the food and thinks maybe some miracle will happen where over the next couple of days, someone will be within earshot. I can yell to them and they can come get me, or maybe someone will see me when they're hiking overhead. I can just wait it out. But by the 5th day, he had run out of water. He was becoming delirious. He was actually drinking his own urine at this point, and he expected to die overnight. And so with his multi-tool, he etched his name into the rock, and then underneath it, he etched the date he expected to die, which was the next day. And then after that, he put his multi-tool down, and he did have a camera with limited battery, and he pulled that out, and selfie style, he filmed goodbyes to his family.
My name's Aaron Ralston. My parents are down on Larry Ralston of Englewood, Colorado. Whoever finds this, please make an attempt to get it to them. Be sure of it. I would appreciate it.
After he was done filming, he put the camera away and he leaned up against the rock and fully expected to die. But he starts to have this really intense dream where he sees himself playing with a child and he's missing his right arm. And he takes that as a sign that he's supposed to chop his arm off and get out of here alive and go start a family. And so he wakes up from this dream and suddenly all he wants to do is survive. And he looks at his arm, which is already starting to decompose at this point, and he thinks to himself, I know I can't cut through bone, but what if I'm able to break my arm clean through? I can take this blade and cut through the break in the bone. And so he began testing using the edge of the rock as a fulcrum to see if he'd be able to break his arm, using the torque of pushing it over the edge of the rock. And when he started to sense it was possible, he took a deep breath, and then he broke his arm, takes his multi-tool, and over the next hour, he would painstakingly saw through his entire arm. Once his arm was free, he couldn't believe it. He actually smiled when he saw his arm still pinned underneath the rock because of his sheer will to live at this point. And high on adrenaline, he climbed these 65 feet out of this canyon with his one arm. He gets to the trail and he runs 6 miles, and he happens to run into a group of hikers. They give him food and water, and they're totally alarmed by him, but they're happy to help him. They call 911, and medics arrive, and they save Aaron's life. Following Aaron Ralston's rescue, they went back to retrieve his arm, but in order to move that boulder, they had to bring out 13 park rangers, a hydraulic jack, and a winch, and all this heavy equipment, and they were barely able to move it. And they told Aaron, had you still been in place, there's no way we could have placed the equipment without killing you. So basically, you had to cut your arm off in order to get out of there. There was no other way out. And so for Aaron, I'm sure that felt pretty good to feel like you cut your arm off and that was the right decision. They would take his arm and they would cremate it and give the ashes to Aaron. And Aaron, after having his cremated arm for a couple of days, decided, no, I need to put this where it belongs. And so Aaron went back out to the canyon where he had been trapped, and he scattered his ashes over the boulder that had nearly killed him. In 2010, Aaron's ordeal was turned into a huge blockbuster movie called 127 Hours, where James Franco plays Aaron Ralston in the movie, and it's an incredible movie, albeit it's pretty hard to watch. Aaron Ralston himself said the movie, although it's a drama, is pretty much a documentary because James Franco does an incredible job portraying his emotions and what it was actually like to be trapped underneath this boulder for 5 days. In 1984,
Okay. I don't know if I could do that. Like, I'm a pretty big boy. I can handle quite a bit of stuff. Like, yeah, I can handle some bow. You know what I mean? Handle some bow. But that made my balls tighten up, bro. I've never watched the movie 127 Hours. I don't want to watch it now. No. No. That just, no. To snap. No.
18-year-old Timothy Molnar was living at home with his parents in Daytona Beach, Florida, while going to school for aeronautical mathematics. On January 24th, Timothy gets up and begins his day just like every other day of the work week, by going downstairs, having a bite to eat, and then taking his younger brother, Frank, to school. Once he dropped Frank off, he drove across town to his university where he had class, but as soon as he parked, he realized he had forgotten his bike, and that was something he brought with him everywhere. And so before class started, he went back home, he got his bike, put it in his car, turned around, and headed out, and his mother would step outside and see him trailing away down the road, and that was the last time she, or anybody in their family for that matter, saw him alive. That night, when Tim didn't come home, his family called the police. The police asked them, is there any reason he would want to run away? Is he in trouble? Is there anything going on? And his family's like, no, he's a straight-A student. He's got lots of friends. He's super happy. He's well-adjusted. He's on a great career path. There's nothing in his life to indicate that he would want to run away or that he's in trouble. I know he doesn't drink or do drugs. There's really nothing. So the police begin their investigation, and they start by looking at the family's credit card bills because they knew Tim had a credit card that was connected to the family account. And they found there had been a charge placed the same day he had gone missing in a gas station about 150 miles away. And so the police go out to this gas station and they find someone that had been there when Tim was there. And he was able to describe exactly what he looked like, what his car looked like. And the police ask him, was Tim alone? And the witness says, yeah, he was alone. He was acting totally normal. I saw him go into the store and then I saw him come back out again. And that was it. I don't know where he went after the gas station. So for the next couple of days, nothing really happened. There were no leads to operate on and Tim wasn't getting in touch with them. So they just waited. Then on January 30th, so about a week after Tim has gone missing, Tim's family receives a letter from an auto impound company in Atlanta, Georgia. And the letter basically says, there is a car that's sitting in our lot that is registered to your house. You need to come out here and get it. And so the family goes to Atlanta, Georgia to inspect the car, and they walk up to it, and there's nothing suspicious about it. There's no scratches on it. The tires are all fully inflated. They look inside, and there's no sign of a struggle. There's no blood. There's no debris of any kind. But what they would find inside the car were Tim's credit cards, his wallet, his license, and other items suggesting that perhaps Tim is trying to ditch his old identity and start anew. They also noticed a few very expensive items that they knew were always in his car were now missing. His car stereo, his toolbox, and his bike. Tim's family stayed in Atlanta for a couple of days thinking maybe Tim will return to this car, but after a couple of days, it was clear that they weren't doing any good sitting there, so they went back to Florida. When they got back, they looked inside of Tim's room a little bit more closely, and they discovered that none of his clothes had been taken. There was no suitcase taken. It was like he left with just the clothes on his back. They also checked his savings account, and he had taken all the money out but left $10 in there. And the family believed that by leaving that $10, what he was really saying is, I'm going to come back someday. But he didn't come back, and they never, ever heard about him again. It was like he just vanished. A decade after Tim went missing, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment about Timothy and his disappearance in hopes that the viewers would be able to give them some information about the case. And sure enough, a man named Stephen Cull, who was living in Wisconsin, called into the show and said, without a doubt, I know where Timothy is. He told them this story about how 10 years earlier, he was walking around this forested area in Wisconsin when he came to a clearing in the middle of this forest, and he saw this lump in the middle of the ground. He didn't know what it was. It was wintertime, so he couldn't tell if it was wood or an animal. And he walked up to it, and he looked down, and he realized it was this huge block of ice. And when he brushed the snow off the top, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Inside of this huge block of ice is the dead body of a young man. Cull would immediately call the police, who would show up. They would get the body out of the ice, but there was no identifying information on him, and he was very badly decomposed at this point, and so they had no way to identify him. And so he was buried, and he was unclaimed. But from the second Steve saw that dead body in the ice, that image was seared into his mind.
Oh, yeah.
So when the TV show Unsolved Mysteries put a picture of Tim up on the screen saying, if you've seen this guy, let us know, Steven's like, oh my gosh, I recognize those clothes. That's the guy who was dead in the ice block. And so the police go to Wisconsin, they dig up the body that was inside of the ice, they do a DNA test, and sure enough, it's Tim Molnar. Even though Tim's body was almost completely skeletonized at this point, the coroner said there's no sign of trauma to his body, none. However, they weren't able to determine a cause of death. To this day, we have no idea how or why Tim wound up 1,200 miles away, frozen inside of a block of ice.
Aliens. Has to be aliens, I'm just saying.
In 2009, 25-year-old Larry Mario Moncada graduated from college and moved back in with his parents in Iowa. He was excited about his future, and his parents were extremely proud of him. As soon as Larry moved back home, the first thing he did was go out and get a placeholder job at the No Frills supermarket, which was a local supermarket right in town. He figured, you know what, it's temporary, but I don't want to just sit around all day. I want to do that until I find my career. But even though the job was supposed to be temporary, he found that he kind of loved the job because he loved the people he worked with, and his coworkers would later say that they loved working with him too. But everything in Larry and his family's life would get turned completely upside down in November of 2009. On November 26th, while a blizzard raged outside, Larry and his family celebrated Thanksgiving inside. After everyone was done eating, Larry told them that he actually had an overnight shift at the supermarket. And I don't think his family knew he had the ship. So they were like, oh man, do you really gotta go? The weather's so bad. And he's like, no, I gotta go. I don't mind. And they're like, all right, well, hey, sorry you gotta work. And Larry walks outside and goes to work. The next morning, when he came back from that shift, his mother would say something seemed off about him. When he came inside, he was very disoriented. He didn't really know where he was. And his mom's trying to tell him that everything's okay. You know, what's going on? Did something happen out there? And this is when it dawned on her that he could be having an anxiety attack. Just a few years earlier, Larry had had a whole bunch of panic attacks and he was really struggling with anxiety. And it wasn't until his mom made him go to the doctor and put him on medication that he stabilized. But at this moment, she didn't know if her son was on any medication or not. So just to play it safe, she said, hey, let's go to the doctor and have you looked at. You don't seem well. So she brings him to the doctor and the doctor quickly prescribes Larry an antidepressant. They go and fill the prescription, they go back home, and Larry takes one of these antidepressants. But the medication didn't seem to be doing anything because over the course of the day, Larry got progressively more and more stressed out and more confused seeming, and eventually he told his mom that he was hearing voices in his head that were telling him his heart is beating too quickly and he needs to eat sugar to slow down his heart. And his mom is looking at him thinking, what do I do about this? And so all she could think to do was just to stand next to him and kind of comfort him as he sits there eating sugar over the course of the day. Finally, that night, he would fall asleep, and his mother prayed that over the course of the night that somehow this medication he had been prescribed would kick in and he would wake up and feel better, because so far it really seemed to only be getting exponentially worse. But the next morning when Larry got up, he was just as bad as the night before, except now he was having these vivid hallucinations. He said there were people in the house that were looking for him. And so he spent the day running around the house, hiding from people in the house that were not actually there. Then finally, that night, Larry just kind of loses it and begins screaming at his parents and berating them before suddenly running out the front door without shoes, without a jacket, no wallet, no cell phone, no anything. And he just runs directly into the blizzard and disappears. His family was so caught off guard by this happening that it took them a minute to get out the front door after him. But it was snowing so hard they could barely see in front of their face. And they knew he was gone. So immediately they call the police, but the police have the same issue. They can't really go looking for him right now because the visibility was so bad. And so they told his family that we can't really start until tomorrow morning, so hopefully he turns up tonight. So the next day when the weather clears up a little bit, the police go out looking for Larry, and they're asking people in town if they've seen him, and no one's seen Larry. And unfortunately, because it had snowed so much the night before, many of Larry's tracks leading out of Larry's house were now covered over. And so after a couple of days of this, when there's just no sign of this guy, the police say to the family, look, there's not much we can do. We're just going to have to wait to see if he turns up. 10 years later, the No Frills supermarket where Larry used to work was out of business and it was about to get torn down. And some contractors were sent in to start ripping down the shelving and breaking down the inside of the building. And when they went into the back and began pulling away those huge freezers that keep your milk and your dairy products in, and start pulling those away from the wall, Larry's body comes tumbling out. It had been pinned in this tiny 18-inch wide space between the back of the freezer and the wall. It's believed on the night Larry ran out of his parents' house barefoot into a blizzard, he ran right up the road and went to the No Frills supermarket. Now, it was closed at the time, but he had access to the back door with the key code because he worked there. And so he went inside and he climbed on top of the freezers, the section of the freezers that jut back into the space that no one in the store could see. And he climbed on top because on top of there, all the workers would kind of congregate up there. It was like a little clubhouse where the workers would avoid the managers for little pockets of the day. And so Larry probably climbed up there because it represented a really happy place for him. And when he got up there, he must have somehow tripped and fallen into the tiny 18-inch space between the freezer and the wall. Investigators believe there's no way he actually got hurt when he fell into this little space. He got wedged in there, but he wasn't harmed. The problem was these huge fans that run constantly to keep the freezer cold were unbelievably loud and would have completely drowned out his cries for help. And so no one knows for sure how long this took, but eventually he would die because no one heard him. Looking back at old Facebook posts around the time that Larry would have been dead behind the freezer, there was a whole bunch of people that were commenting on Facebook that they didn't want to shop at the No Frills supermarket anymore. Apparently there was a really bad smell coming out of the back freezer. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's video, in the...
Oh my God! That's okay. Daniel. I don't know what to say about any of that. All I'm going to say is that's where we're calling it quits, y'all. Yep. Alright. So, if you're a fan of the spooky, scary, strange, or deranged, think about subscribing. If you enjoyed today's video, think about leaving a thumbs up because, you know, I collect people's thumbs. It's a hobby. Give me your thumbs. And, as always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.